Everyone. And it's a glorious one, too. Absolutely beautiful. Welcome to Onward. I'm your host, Adrianne Hamilton-Butler, and you are watching us, listening to us on WCEG Network. You can follow us on Facebook, Insta, YouTube, LinkedIn, and I believe that's it. But I'm really happy to have our guest today. It's going to be an interesting show, one that I think is very timely and very needed. Um, so I have my hosts, Spencer Murray, or my guests, Spencer Murray and Skip Walker. Oh, and I'm going to make sure that before we get into the show, that I say the disclaimer that all of the ideas expressed on Onward today will be those of the host and our guests. Today's show, I think, is relevant because of what's going on in our political environment, in our society today. And our show's title today is Woke, a Spiritual Perspective. We're going to talk a little bit about that because I think the word woke has actually been hijacked and used in a way that it was never intended. But before we go on, I want to introduce my host for today. First, I'll start with Spencer Murray. Spencer is the founder and executive director of No Harm. He's a speaker, writer, minister, and conflict transformation practitioner. That's a mouthful, Spencer. Who specializes in working with men and boys as it relates to unhealthy ideas of masculinity and how those ideas contribute to violence towards women and the community. And I also want to say that you are a part of a very important organization, Men Stopping Violence, which is no longer, but I think that role that you had there really set the stage for you starting No Harm. And then we have Skip Walker. Skip is an Episcopal priest, jazz musician, and educator. He is currently the ministry coordinator with Peoples of African Descent for the East Carolina Diocese and priest in charge at the historic St. Joseph's Episcopal Church in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and St. Mark's Episcopal Church in Wilmington, North Carolina. And Skip, in a minute, I also want you to talk about an event that you're going to be a part of with the Poor People's Campaign in North Carolina next week. Before we get started, Spencer, I want to talk a little bit about the work that you are doing with No Harm and the work that you did with Men Stopping Violence, because I think it's important for today's discussion.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And let me mention too, just because I don't want to leave them out. I do work with Georgia Justice Project as well, as a restorative justice facilitator, and also with Emory, teaching those conflict skills. And I think all of it comes together in the work that I do with No Harm and Men Stopping Violence. Certainly set the stage for it, like you said, Adrian. And even before Men Stopping Violence, just my own personal experience and wanting to see beyond my own lens, right, especially my own male lens that I had been indoctrinated and trained in. And so began reading feminist literature, particularly Black feminist literature at the time, that really helped me see through a different lens. So really that all set the stage. And so I found that when you talk about violence in the community, that it was oftentimes, there's many reasons, but rooted in our ideas and what we think and how we see each other. And particularly since we're talking about the spiritual sense, and I kind of, when I was in school, kind of focused on the image of God and how that sometimes, or the way we perceive it, is rooted in violence that we can create and perpetrate on other people, particularly against women. And so, you read the as you read that bio or that line, that I think men and boys, or I know, because I know my experience, really haven't taken stock or looked at how their own manhood training, how those toxic patriarchal ideas have harmed them, and as it harms them, that harm is also manifest on others, children and women and the community. So the idea with no harm is the tagline is reducing harm by restoring wholeness. And so that's the idea. And so if men are whole and see themselves as whole, and not suppressing half of themselves for the sake of being a man or manning up, then they can become whole. And the idea is that someone who is whole or strives to continue to be whole will strive not to do harm as well. So there you have No Harm, which is the National Organization for Healing and Redefining Manhood. So that's it. And Adrian, we could talk about it all day, but that is really the basis of No Harm, really to help humanity heal by starting with men and looking at the way they've been
And I
trained.
have to say that, I really appreciate you, Spencer, for doing this, because we have to bring men's voices to dealing with gender-based violence.
Yeah.
A lot of times we deal with women, and I worked with GCADV for a while, the Georgia Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And we talked a lot about how do we get men engaged in that movement.
Yes.
So thank you for the work that you're doing there.
You're welcome.
So Skip, the work that you're doing in North Carolina with the Episcopal Church and really elevating the voices of people of color. Talk a little bit about that work that you're doing and the event that you're going to be a part of next week.
Okay, well, so I'm a jazz musician and an Episcopal priest, so a lot of people hear that and they're like, well, what does one have to do with the other? And the answer is everything. So jazz, if you understand the history of jazz music, it is the soundtrack of the American struggle. And also it's the soundtrack of America's struggle with race, because it was birthed out of all kinds of ugliness and racial tensions in New Orleans. And then it just evolved into this beautiful thing that became America's only original art form. So I've been doing a lot of what we call in the Episcopal Church jazz masses. That's nothing new. The jazz pianist Mary Lou Williams back in the 60s was, I think, one of the first to have that concept in the Catholic Church where you do worship with jazz music. And then Duke Ellington also did it. So I've been doing that in the Episcopal churches here in North Carolina in the South, because it hasn't been happening a lot in the South. Mostly when you talk about jazz and jazz masses, and talking about bigger churches up north. And then the other work that I'm doing is really with my congregation, helping them to take a critical look at the Bible and Scripture, because somehow we've gotten to a point in this country that if you're a critical thinker, you're almost isolated. There's no place for you with spirituality and religion and Scripture. So we take a critical look. What I mean by that is we'll look at the Bible and look at the historical context of the Scripture. We look at Jesus and we see what Jesus was really all about. And we're talking about woke today, and I guess we'll get into that later.
Yes.
We look at the real Jesus, the revolutionary, the one who spoke truth to power, not the one that's been created today in this country, the one that justified that justifies and co-signs all kinds of bigotry and hatred. So we do that. But also in our diocese, I'm a part of the Racial Healing Commission. And every year we have a jazz and race symposium. This year, next Saturday, actually, in Greenville, North Carolina, Reverend William Barber will come and speak at the symposium. I will play and feature some of my friends who are great jazz musicians, and we'll have a good time talking about race and injustice and the hypocrisy that we're dealing with now politically. And then we'll kind of have some jazz to give us some atmosphere while we do those things. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate your work, especially in terms of, again, elevating African-American voices in the Episcopal Church. A little later on, I'll ask you to share with us information about next week's event so that our friends in North Carolina or people who want to go can register. Is that going to be a free event, Skip?
Yes, but you have to
Okay.
register. You have to
Okay.
register.
So we'll talk through that.
Mhm.
But yeah, so I think that this is a good segue into what we wanted to talk about woke a spiritual perspective. But one of the things I did want to do before we do that is actually talk about someone who really did early on kind of speak about what faith and Christianity means to people who are experiencing poverty, to those who are oppressed. I'm going to lift up this book here. But this is Howard Thurman, and he has many books, but this is Jesus and the Disinherited. And I just want to read a quote from that and ask you all about it before we really get into the topic. But Howard says in his book, I can count on the fingers of one hand the number of times I've heard a sermon on the meaning of Christianity to the man who stands with his back against the wall.
Mm.
The masses of men live with their backs against the wall. They are the poor, the disinherited, the dispossessed. What does our religion say to them? That was Howard Thurman's words in 1949, and they're still relevant today. What are your thoughts on the fact that when we think about Christianity, does it really in our churches today speak to those who feel that their backs are up against the wall?
Well, I'll go first. Yeah, I think as soon as I hear that, I think of James Cone, God of the oppressed. You know, that that everything, like Skip talked about the word woke being hijacked in Christianity, this perception of Christianity being hijacked. That's so far away from the revolutionary Jesus, so far away from the radical Jesus, so far away from those teachings, and it seems to be one that's hijacked by those who want to be in power. And so even those in power who want to use it in that way, they sometimes think the teachings of Jesus are weak, you
Right.
know, are weak, you know what I mean? And they bring up things like turn the other cheek and all those things, but that's the ways of power don't want to invest in that. But I think the Black church, historically, the Black church has always had to has seen religion and Christianity and their Christianity and their Jesus differently, as one who does cry for them, one who does stand for them, one who does support them, one who does uplift them and give them hope and all those things. And I think we're seeing now in times, I mean, in times of challenge, that is always the case. And we always have to be there and not forget that is the Jesus that we worship. That is the Jesus that we hold dear in our hearts. And so, but I think Christianity has been hijacked as well, because I think power also needs God to justify what they're doing. They need to use that. They need to use or justify and interpret scripture in a certain way to justify what they're doing. Just like there's one lady who says patriarchy needs God to justify injustice. You know what I mean? They use it to do that. And so certainly I think it's hijacked, but for us, staying true to the message of Jesus is critical. The message, the poor, that what Reverend Barber talks about, what Skip is going to participate in next week. I mean, the poor, the disenfranchised, the marginalized. God is on that side. God is on the side of those people. And so I think it behooves all of us to remember that, and the Black church to remember that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Skip, what do you want to add to that?
Well, yeah, I agree. And I think what has really it's been a devastating blow to the church since the civil rights movement has been the prosperity gospel, the feel-good gospel. That has nothing to do with the heavy laden, the downtrodden, the oppressed,
Right.
the poor. that somehow everything is about, material things, that God is going to bless you with material things if you do A, B, C, and D. And I think that has pushed a lot of people away from the church. My uncle, who's deceased now, was very critical of the church. He used to always say, if half the people that Jesus ministered to were to walk into the average church today, most Christians wouldn't want to sit beside him. You know, I just believe that the prosperity gospel has really been devastating, and of course, in this country too, we know with this country's racist past and what Christianity's been taken by some of our white brothers and sisters in power, and it's been used as a weapon to justify racism and all kinds of ugly things, right? So all of those things, it's created this complex soup of ugliness that has nothing to do with Christianity. And a lot of people don't want anything to do with it, right? Because we've lost the true simple message of Christ. And his message is really simple. And we made it this complex thing. But his message is really simple, to be compassionate towards
Exactly.
others.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
To allow his love to transform you, and then you have the power to go and transform those around you. Very simple message. But it's definitely been hijacked for sure.
I agree. And I love that you brought up the word compassion, because I think that word, injustice, those two words are really missing from the conversations that we're having now as Christians. And I want to read actually from Luke 4:18, where it says, Jesus declared, the Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. Mm-hmm. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, and to set the oppressed free. When we talk about Christianity and people, we don't often talk about the poor or the oppressed, or the prisoner. And I think for us as people of color, we feel lost in the conversation, which now sends me to being woke, because woke, being awake, is something that the Bible actually talks about, being awake. And I want to talk about what woke is. Woke is to be aware, informed, and to be awake to the injustices of our society, to support marginalized communities, to seek to include rather than exclude. It's to see ourselves as interconnected and to act with compassion and humility. And this resonates with the Black community because we want to be connected. We have felt disconnected for so long. And so that is really what woke is about, is being awake to the injustices of the world and acting upon it in a way that expresses, our humility and our compassion. Unfortunately, this word was taken by both sides to mean something else. I want to talk a little bit about, with the progressives, woke evolved into the shorthand for political activism, minus the humility and compassion for others. And then on the right, woke became a word of disdain and ridicule, political correctness gone awry. And so what I really want to do is take the next few minutes to talk really about what woke is spiritually, what it means to be awake, and to talk about how we in this time can move forward and really take back that word, and act in a way that uplifts everyone. So who wants to tackle this first? It's a lot, I know.
No, you scared you.
Wow. Well, woke. I think the way to take the word back for the church, that is, anyway, spiritually speaking, is to get to know the real Jesus, to get to know that, Jesus can speak for himself. And if you get to know him and his teachings, get beyond the cliches about him and the perceptions about him and get to know Jesus for yourself, woke becomes very clear what the definition is. He would say
Can I
things to his, he would say
can I
things to his,
interrupt you for a
yes,
moment?
go ahead.
I like what you just said. Jesus can speak for himself. What do you mean by that?
Well, people seem to, throughout history, people have always taken Jesus and shaped and molded him into whatever they want him or need him to be to justify selfish agendas, right? So if you just strip him down and study his teachings, he's very simple and it's not complex. He would say things to his disciples like, don't pray like they do, talking about the religious hypocrites. Don't do what they do. This is how you do it. Wake up, be woke.
Right.
He attacked the religious purity system of his day. He attacked the world system of his day, but very, very simple teachings. He's not complex at all. But he becomes complex when you take him and you twist and distort his teachings for your own personal agenda or evil agenda, right? But at the heart of his teaching is very simple. Wake up.
Right.
Check out what's going on around you.
Right.
Don't do that. God doesn't do that. This is what God wants. So when his teachings are just as much about as what not to do than what to do.
Yeah.
And his disciples are the example for us, what it means to be woke. He's very simple. Yeah, I'll just leave that at that. So go ahead.
Because he's specifically uses words like the oppressed and the poor, right? I mean, so Jesus did not shy away from the least of these, and actually that's who the good news was for. Spencer.
Yeah, no, that's so good. It's when I think of woke, the first thing I think of for me is me being woke, me waking up, to who I really am, me waking up to Christ in me and waking up to that, So I think woke, there's just a spiritual basis. That's the basis of the work we do, and that scripture you read is one of my favorites. That's the foundation for what I do out in the world. And I think of woke that it's nothing. Yeah, it's been hijacked, but it's nothing new because it is a spiritual base. I think when you talk about the Bible, I think about and Skip made mention of this. Jesus found his disciples. This is Matthew. Jesus found his disciples in sleep and said, "Could you not watch with me 1 hour? Stay awake."
Yes.
Stay awake and pray that you may not enter into temptation. That's wake up, wake up.
Yes.
Share the experience with me. Know what's in you, wake up. And in Matthew, it says, therefore, stay awake, for you do not know on what day your Lord will come. This idea of staying awake. Ephesians, therefore, is awake, O sleeper, and arise from your dead. Christ will shine on you. All those things, is staying awake. And so I think before it gets hijacked by anybody, it's that awakening in me. And so then it leads me to do what I do in the world. And so what Skip is doing in his own way, I think what I'm doing is waking people up. It's waking people up to that reality, not not judging or but I have to be awake first, and I think of this word woke. We talk about it being hijacked, and let's just talk about it in the worldly sense in this country. How people try to hijack it and attack others for being woke, right? Is that the wealthy and those in power been woke for years. They woke for how to hide their money. They woke for how to use the system and for that financial gain. They woke and how to, do different things to keep maintaining their wealth. You know what I mean? They've been woke. But it seems that when you and I wake up and it infringes on their wokeness, then it becomes a problem. Then it infringes on their power and privilege, then it becomes a problem. You want to hijack it and you want to demonize it and doing all that. So in a real sense, but being woke is that spiritual awakening first. I think that happens in all of us individually and then collectively. Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Yeah.
And you talked about how being woke first starts with us, and it
Yeah.
informs how we show up in the world, how
Yeah.
we interact with others, how we stay connected to community. I want to talk to you both a little bit and personalize this
Yeah.
about not only the work that you're doing, in ministry or with no harm, but also how you personally
Mm.
show up in a world that is increasingly against inclusiveness, and against a sense of us being a community of all people. Um, how are you dealing with that, and how are you personally showing up in this environment?
Mm.
Well, I'll let Spence go first on that one.
Oh yeah, I see how we switching on, man. That's good love. We got much love
Yeah.
for each other. We got grace and all that, man. So
Well,
no, I think it's important. I think it's important, and because that for me, that I mean for all of us, but certainly for me, how I show up. How am I going to show up? And then when you talk about inclusiveness, right, in my work, so because I did go to seminary and did that conflict transformation study in seminary, and that's how I ended up talking about the religious roots of violence and and patriarchal roots of violence. And I think of this. I think of let's just talk about gender inclusivity.
mm-hmm.
Um, I think of what I think many people didn't hear in church. You wouldn't even talk about the creation story. You talk about that. But I think of Genesis 1:27. It says, God created man in his image, male and female, he created them. That is an inclusive, that is right, that is an inclusive teaching right there that speaks of inclusion, male and female, he created them. And I think that if at the core of that, then then the church or your spiritual is not teaching that, and it's teaching that women are a secondary creation, or you use other scriptures to talk about the creation story that kind of doesn't put woman at the same level as man. Man was created first, and man, you can people are what we call Pauline Christians, living Paul instead of Christ. Because there's a lot of scriptures that talk about women can't speak in church and do this, and they need to ask their husbands. So all these texts of terror that can be emphasized. But I think Christ says in Christ there is no male and female, there is no black, there is. So it speaks of inclusivity. And as Skip said, when you really know about his teaching and how he moved and what he taught, and how he bucked the system, and even in his interaction with women, so to speak, that it speaks of Christ being inclusive. Christ is inclusive of all that.
Exactly. And you're speaking about too how we are increasingly becoming a culture of othering.
Yes.
Right. Where we're now we're othering immigrants, we're othering people of color, we're making them less human, and so the suffering that they experience begins to really not mean anything. Because they're not like us, they're not like the people in power, right? It's convenient to do that. And what that breeds is fear, which can lead to violence. Right. Because those who are being othered feel like Howard Thurman says, like their backs are up against the wall. Yeah. Like, where can I turn? And is God really for me? And so there's this feeling of being disconnected. Skip, talk a little bit about that and how you see that maybe showing up in your church. Is there this increased sense of fear or disconnectedness? Or even in the community?
Yeah, well, definitely in the community and in society in general. Howard Thurman talked about those things that separate people: the fear, the deception, the hate, the lack of love. Right, all of those things separate people. So for me as a priest, the challenge is, how do I navigate all that? And it starts with me. I have to do the work. I have to do the work.
Yes.
Because if the love of God is truly in you, there is no othering. You
Right.
don't, because his love transforms you, right? You accept others, you love others, you don't talk about others or reject others. And so I have to do the work to make sure that I am studying the one that we follow, who is Christ, that
Right.
I am reading constantly, that old saying, that leaders are readers. So I read, try to do everything that I can to allow my spirit to grow, praying, fasting, reading, devouring books. All these books behind me, I've read most of them, right? And so,
That's amazing.
but that is, that's my responsibility. This thing that we have, of we think that God is going to somehow come down and tap us on the head, and all of our problems will go away, and all of our growth will happen instantaneously. No, we have work to do. We have to pray, but it's up to us to do the work. So I
Right.
try to work on myself, and I'm like everybody else. I'm a work in progress.
Oh,
I'm a
absolutely.
Yeah,
flawed individual
me
like
too.
everybody
Me too.
else, but
Yeah,
I try to work and grow to be a leader, and then hopefully that rubs off on the congregation and
yeah,
those that I touch in the community.
yeah. Adrian, can I add something to what you
Absolutely.
said? Because
Yes.
I wanna be honest and transparent. I'm always trying to do that with myself first, be honest and transparent. And when you talked about this othering piece, and as Skip just made mention too, I have to stay and do that work on myself.
Yeah.
It's particularly in this, well, all the time, but then in this climate, because I think pain and trauma can lead someone back to their own silo of people that
Yes.
look like them, or just people who have their own experience. And
Right.
when that happens, sometimes it's hard to gather empathy for others who are suffering. And so I have to really work on myself and keep doing the work to remind me to not be drawn in by that temptation, to just go somewhere where I feel safe, because there's so much pain and trauma. You know what I mean? I'm working in violence, domestic violence.
Right.
Safety, community safety. To find safety, you go where it's familiar sometimes, and you don't take risks because it's so much pain and trauma. And so when I see something happening to other people, sometimes I really have to talk to myself, because sometimes there's the temptation to say, hey, where was the outrage when this was happening to Black people? Where was the outrage when this was happening, when the crack epidemic was happening? Where's the outrage with the carceral system? And so I have to talk to myself so I can, see that all this harm and oppression is connected,
Exactly.
that is connected. And what happens to someone across the seas is happening to me too. You know what I mean? I have to really continue to affirm that to myself, so I don't go into that silo and just be about, Christ. Christ, is about human liberation, the
Right.
liberation of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
I love what you said, because one of the things I was thinking about, as we're going along this conversation, is how do we start moving forward to talk about how we can be instruments of positive change?
Yeah,
Because it's easy to be comfortable in your lifestyle and to say, oh, well, I'm really sorry that that's happening to you.
hmm,
I'm good. You'll figure it out. And I think that's a lot of what's going on. People see it,
hmm,
but because they're good, they're not going to do anything to help their brother or sister. And you know, Spencer, that I've been in the homelessness space for a long time. And I just saw where HUD, for example, has funding that was promised, but that funding has not reached our nonprofits so that they can continue to support the housing efforts of those in need. That, I'm sorry, that breaks my heart, because there are families who are counting on that money to live and to raise their children. And we now have a government that's making it difficult for them to do so, but I'm good. So I don't need to say anything about that. I don't need to act on it. Let's talk a little bit about how we can really be positive instruments of change and how we can walk alongside our brothers and sisters who are suffering, so that they can be encouraged, but also see God in this. Because if we're not being encouraging, they won't see God. They will feel disconnected. So how do we help to bring about change in a way that will really encourage people and let them know that God is present?
Well, I think that has to happen literally one person at a time.
Yeah.
When you think about the work that Jesus did, he did it with a very small and it was a very small following.
Yeah.
And he did it one person, one encounter at a time.
Right.
And because if you look at the big picture, it can be overwhelming.
Right.
And my mentor, Catherine Meeks, always used to say, she said, you know, just do the work. She said, the work might not be yours to finish. You may not finish it in a lifetime, but just do the work, do your part. So I think if all of us if we could just focus, those who are woke and those who know better and try to do better, we just have to touch one individual at a time and hope that it is contagious, like what happened with Jesus, or what happened with movements like the civil rights movement. Just hope those things catch on. And just don't get discouraged because the work is overwhelming, but just do the work.
Yeah.
Sir.
I totally agree. One at a time, you know, and that's sort of that's what I do. I mean, there's opportunities every day when you meet people, to see people, you know, and I am a you know, I kind of have this love-hate relationship with social media, you know what I mean? Because everything's out on social media, but you know, it's to the point where if people don't see it on social media, they think it ain't happening.
Exactly.
They think it ain't happening, but we got every day to go out. You know, I meet people who come over here to do work on the house. We establish relationships because I embrace them like that. I don't care what color they are, who they are, and they feel that, you know. And I think we have to model that too. So, for instance, in the work I do, and that started with Men Stopping Violence and all that, I think most men, you know, just talk about this space of DV and intimate partner violence. Most men, as I thought, most men believe that violence against women and domestic violence is a woman's issue. You know, that women take up the issue, that women do that. Oh, I'm not, you know, those are bad men who do that. I'm over here, so I don't. And it's a woman's issue. But no, the almost overwhelming majority of people who commit violence are men. You know, and not saying that women don't, but we know that the overwhelming majority. So men have to stand up for women. As me, as a heterosexual cisgendered man, I have to stand up for my same gender loving brothers and sisters and trans. You know what I mean? And so I have to cross over to see all of that suffering and know that it's all connected. And so, yeah.
No, go ahead.
No, that was it. I mean, I think people have to see that as well. So I have to model that as well. And I think that's modeling it's my attempt to model inclusion, to model this thing, you know what I mean? That we have to stand up and take care of each other, wherever suffering is.
That's what kind of spoke to me, is the whole standing up,
Yeah.
right? Because again, it's hard to stand up.
Mm-hmm.
When you feel that standing up might cost you something.
Yeah.
And so you talked about in your work, it's getting men to stand up against gender-based violence. Skip, in your work, and especially let's talk a little bit about next week, what does standing up mean? And how do we empower people to feel like it's okay to stand up, to take that risk? Because if we don't stand up, who will? No one will. No one's going to stand up for us. We have to start standing up for others on our own as a community. So talk a little bit about next week, talk about what you're doing in your work as a priest.
Yeah, so next week at the Jazz and Race Symposium, Reverend Barber, William Barber, again, will be speaking. And the focus is on racism, or what's called America's original sin. And a lot of times, the way you address those big issues is to bring like whites and blacks in the same room together and have difficult conversations. And you do that by not attacking them or attacking their legacy or their ancestors. You just do it by just having the real tough conversations in love. And so that's what we do at the symposium.
Yeah.
That's where it starts.
Right.
But then our white brothers and sisters need to take the message and have those conversations among themselves, right? And so those who get, even you think about Martin Luther King, there were whites who marched with him.
Absolutely.
Right. And it's those whites who understand, who really get it, who need to continue to take the message to other whites who don't get it. But the whole idea of the symposium is just to come together and have hard conversations about race, and hopefully inspire people one person at a time to change their views, or just come out. And you talked about what you were really talking about. We're talking about selfishness, right? When we're just consumed with our own stuff and we don't care about others. What Jesus calls us, that's what Jesus calls us out of. That's what compassion is all about.
Yeah.
Right.
As human beings, our first reflex with everything is to be selfish and to preserve self.
Exactly.
But Jesus calls us out of that. So we're having these hard conversations to challenge the selfishness that's in us all.
Right.
And not just think about us.
Exactly.
Our well-being.
Right.
But our brothers and sisters, no matter who they may be. Right.
And again, I think that's what being woke is all about, right? It
Yes.
really is taking the focus off of ourselves and being awake to what's happening all around us, the pain that's all around us, the suffering that's all around us, and what we are equipped to do or purposed to do to be able to play a role in alleviating that for our brothers and sisters.
Yes.
So a couple of things that you all talked about. Spencer, you talked about social media. And yeah, I have a love-hate with social media.
Yeah.
But social media can be used to get the word out, to bring to light those things that are happening in our society that people don't want us to know about.
Yeah.
How people are suffering.
Yeah.
And so I think we can use that tool to really be a lot more open. And look, I have no problem with us showing what we ate last night for dinner, or the new dress that we bought, that's all good. But really, I think it's time that we show that people are in need of love and compassion.
Yeah.
And I love that, Skip, you used that word a lot. Love. Let's talk, we have about 15 minutes left. Let's talk about how we can bring other people into the conversation and have those difficult conversations. I know, Spencer, you do it in your work.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, because you're talking about having conversations with men about the violence that they perpetrate against women. That's a hard conversation to have.
It is a hard conversation to have. And I know that my strategy, so to speak, is to get men, as I said earlier, encouragement or invite men to see how they've been harmed by some of these standards, because you can't even hold a harm that you might be doing to someone else until you see your own harm. That's my own personal story. 20, 30 years ago, I didn't know the harm that my male indoctrination or training had done to me, was doing to me. And I caused emotional harm. I caused a lot of harm in my own relationships, in a prior marriage, you know what I mean? And so I know that until you wake up to how you're being harmed and how it's harming you, and wake up, you can't see that. And so when you talk about, particularly when we talk about, it's a hard conversation if Black men. So with the intersectionality piece, you have Black men who face what they face in this society, right? And so, but being locked into that pain and trauma oftentimes can prevent you from seeing that you might be taking advantage of your male privilege in relationships that is existing too. But if you're just caught up into this pain and trauma that you're experiencing, you're not able to see that. So it's a way to invite people in. And I think you have to we have to learn how to call people in instead of calling people out all the time. We're in this cancel society, and we call people out. We call them like this. Or we say, "Oh, when I started in the industry, and the violence against women movement, there are people who want to just demonize all men. Men are this, men are, men are," and so, and I heard someone say, which I loved a while ago, that if you want men to come to the table, then you have to take them off the menu. You know what I mean? Then you can't want to talk about men and demonize men and then want them to come to the table. And that goes with anybody. And so I think we have to invite people in, and that's the work. To invite people in, it takes a person who is woke. It takes a person who can hold that space, but you have to be woke and balanced and woke in order to hold that space. Not in in restorative justice work too, the victim offender dialogue. I have to hold space for those who committed harm and those who are harmed, and then bring them together.
Yes, that is so incredibly hard.
Yeah.
And we talked about the difficult conversation, but what's really difficult is the listening.
Yes.
Because a lot of times we don't want to hear what the other person has to say, especially if we feel that they are harming us. Yes. But there's something behind that. And so how do you make space to not only have the discussions, but to listen to what the other side is saying, so that you can be knowledgeable, that you can show compassion, because the compassion isn't just for us, the compassion is for the harmer as well, because there's forgiveness around that. So how do you make space to allow all people to be heard? And we can even talk about what that means for the work that you do, Spencer, and also Skip. I mean, men have to first feel heard before they can start owning what's happening from a violence perspective. But I even mean in a broader sense in society. If the left continues to demonize the right and the right continues to demonize the left, we're not listening. Yeah. And so how do we make space for that?
Yeah.
There again, that's a good question. Again, You go back to the teachings of Jesus for that. You know, everything he did um, was really, and Spence used the word, it's a perfect word, invitation. Everything he did was about an invitation to come and be a part of a new reality, a new way of seeing God, a new way of understanding God. He didn't beat people over the head with the gospel.
Right.
You know, everything he did, everything he said was inviting people in, right, to a new reality, to be with each other, to discuss, to talk about God in a new way, to see God in a new
Yeah.
way. And one of the ways to invite people, I guess, for the church to understand is to do better. When you do good things
Mm.
and you do them in a way that represents God, the way God should be represented, then automatically people will see that and want to be a part of that. Just like when they see the church involved in all kinds of hypocritical things.
Yeah.
When you have like far right evangelicals justifying all the madness and that we see with our political leaders,
Yeah.
they see that that's a rejection. They don't want to. They
That's
don't
right.
want anything to do with that. So I
Right.
think one of the things for us who are spiritually woke, we just need to continue to do those things. And so
Y-
when people see those things, the doing itself is an invitation to come in.
Yes,
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I love that. I love
yeah.
that. There's yeah, I love that too. There's it's saying, I think if there's 8 billion people on the planet, let's say there's 8 billion people on the planet, but there's only one, in the sense of this sense of oneness. And I think that's what Jesus, that's the idea that what you do to another, you do to yourself, you know,
Mhm.
what you know what I mean? And so um we listen because we want to be heard, we become the thing, it's I think that much of the church, I forget this years ago, I forgot the brother's name who said it, but he talked about these bees that most people are concerned with, believing, particularly in the religious space, believing, belonging, and behaving,
Hmm.
and they ignore the last B, which is becoming. Like
Mhm.
becoming the thing. And so when I become it, um, I listen because I want to be listened to. I love because I want to be loved. I give compassion because I want that back, and I get it back. And so my life is rich and blessed with relationships. If you want to be a friend, you have a friend, you got to be a friend. So,
Exactly. That's right.
and so it's that, I think it's that reciprocal nature of what you give out comes back to you.
Exactly.
That allows you to be in a space where you can listen and have empathy. But if there's that wall up, if there's that division, that we're different or we're separate from each other, then you're back to this selfish thing that is about me. It's like Skip said, you in a conversation with somebody, you can't even hear them because you're
Right.
waiting to see you already ready to respond or say what you're gonna say. So you can't listen to them. So it's really a surrender that needs to take place.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah,
yes.
to
Yeah,
intimacy.
listening is an art,
Yeah,
and it
It
has to be
yeah,
is.
it has to be developed.
Yeah.
And if you check out Jesus and his teachings and watch how he moved, he was all about listening, right? He would listen,
Exactly. Yes.
right? And
Absolutely.
he was so good at listening that he could tell you more about you than you knew
yeah.
about you,
That's
right?
right.
So
Yes.
yeah.
That's right. A couple of weeks ago, I was at a women's retreat and I learned this word. You two might be familiar with it. And it was just so beautiful to me. And I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. It's an African word, Ubuntu. It's
Mm-hmm.
Ubuntu.
Yeah,
And it's my humanity is bound in yours, which
yeah,
I believe is just so beautiful. And it emphasizes I am because we are.
yes,
It talks about interconnectedness, community, and shared humanity. Um, and it's built on generosity and hospitality, being friendly, caring, being compassionate. That word means so much because I think that that's something that's missing in our world right now, in our society. In our last few minutes, what do you think we need to do as a community? And I'm talking right now about the African American community, people of color, to help to foster this sense of Ubuntu, this sense of connectedness, really kind of helping to bring in our brothers and sisters who are suffering or fearful of what's happening. How can we be active and advocate out of love and compassion? And we have 4 minutes.
Yeah, I think there's a number of ways. I think we talked about it. Skip mentioned this one at a time thing instead of this idea of mass salvation. I'm a believer in personal transformation. That is personal as well. And I think a lot of things we have to remind our people that God has always been with us. And even when you look at the times now, we talked about the civil rights has always been with us. We can go back in history. And so, and then there's nothing new under the sun, right? There's nothing new under the sun. And so to really go back and hold dear to those stories about how we've overcome, it sounds cliche, but it is true. How we've overcome and how you overcome personally, how we've all overcome,
absolutely.
The fact that all of it, the fact that I'm still here based on my journey is amazing. So it's the same for Skip and you. And so I think reminding each other of that,
absolutely, yes,
and calling people in through love and acceptance and compassion, all those things that in this world there's a big push to see those as soft skills, that those soft, you need to be hard, you know what I mean? Those are soft skills. But that is what brings us to the cross, so to speak, and brings us to salvation, so to speak. And so I think remembering that and doing that work on us personally, and then offering that to others and inviting others.
Absolutely.
But not by beating them over the head. Not by beating them over the head with the Bible or the gospel, like Skip. No.
That pushes people away. It doesn't bring them closer,
that's
right?
And not by might, but by the Spirit. Our Spirit will invite people other into that space, I think.
Skip, I'm going to let you close with your own comments.
Yeah, I would just say, just to kind of piggyback off of what Spence said, we as a people, we need to understand our history and our struggle within that history. And as Spence said, we are overcomers. I think we're at a point in our culture that we have to stop following charismatic leaders who talk a good game and get us all hyped up. But at the end of the day, they're doing nothing, talking loud and saying nothing. We have to realize that as a people, we have all that we need. We do. We have all that we need, but we have to know that and love and come together in love and just be. We are resilient people. We are resilient people. But when you look at a lot of things of when you look at what's happening with our youth today and the struggle, the despair, the disrespect of our women, all the stuff. And I love hip hop music. I love hip hop. I grew up with it. But some of the stuff today is just perpetuating just madness, right?
It is.
It's just embarrassing, right?
It is.
But we got to get beyond that. And we got to get beyond that to some self-love and understanding our history and where we come from. And we are resilient people.
Absolutely.
And we have everything that we need to survive and get through this, even this period right now that we're in with this political madness that we are watching before our eyes every day. We've been through worse as a people. And if we could make it through Jim Crow and
we can make it through this.
We can make it through this.
And with that, Skip, thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you.
And Thank you for being here. Thank you again, WCEG. Everybody have a great Saturday, a great weekend. And as I always end, gotta run.